But the hospital yet again would be set for another move. A survey undertaken in 1791 would confirm the already apparent poor state of the building, when the governors were slapped with a £8,660 bill for repair. This largely went ignored, necessitating another report in 1799, which deemed the building, much like how the patients had been, incurable. In 1803, the governors finally agreed on a project of rebuilding on a new site, and thus another move was required. Move 2. St George's Fields. Now, if you've done a tour of London's greatest museums, you may have actually been to Bethlem without even knowing it. But I'll tell you why in a bit. The new hospital was yet to be built, and the Moorfield site was outright dangerous in parts. As such, patients were transferred to smaller hospitals around London, reducing the population from 266 in 1800 to 119 in 1814. Parliament agreed to provide £10,000 for the fund for a new hospital. However, this came with the caveat that the Bethlem governors would provide accommodation for any soldiers or sailors of the Napoleonic Wars that had been deemed lunatics. A fair deal, I suppose. A site was agreed upon in St George's Fields in Southwark, South London, just a stone's throw away from the Elephant and Castle. The new building was in the neoclassical style, relying heavily on Hooke's original plan. The new architect, James Lewis, ditched the opulent facade in favour of a far more functional and medicinal appearance. The hospital would be completed in 1815 after 3 years of construction, with the first 122 patients arriving in August. And over the coming years, the building would get overcrowded, necessitating extra buildings to be built at the site. Attitudes had become to move on from punishment to treatment at other asylums, such as the Quaker-run York Retreat. But Bethlem held on to the old method of restraint and religious coercion. Bethlem operated largely without any outside inspections during the early part of the 19th century, but external oversight was eventually inevitable. This came along in 1853, when Bethlem's exemption from outside inspection ended. The last of the Monroe dynasty, Edward Thomas Monroe, had left in 1852, heralding the era of the resident physician. With the departure of Monroe, treatment started to move towards non-restraint for the average patient. This was known as moral treatment. Outpatient treatment began as well roughly around the same time, creating the first such method of care in the UK. But be under no illusion that it was a treatment utopia. Although better than just straight up torture, treatment was still pretty harsh by today's standards. Patients were often classified as idiots still, but birds were kept in cages to allow interaction with animals, and even some found their stay at the hospital as not too unpleasant. Padded cells were still employed, along with padded clothing, but were used as sparingly as possible. Sedatives such as paraldehyde and hyoscine were introduced in the 1880s, and warm water bathing was a common treatment, with patients being required to spend up to 8 or 9 hours a day in the bath. The hospital moved towards aiming to treat inpatients for only around a year, with other arrangements being needed if longer term treatment was required. There was a small incurable wing provided, which would house some inpatients for the long haul. There was an entertainment hall which was opened in 1892, and the galleries resembled more of a holiday retreat hotel. In addition, there were outside activities such as bowls. But a story as old as Bethlem would start to develop towards the early part of the 20th century. Yes, it was time to move again. Oh yes, I should also say that the St George's Field site is actually the same building that the Imperial War Museum lives in. The third move to a sunny southern corner of London. Well, we are now back here on the boundary between Croydon and Bromley and the hospital's current location, which is around here on a map. This would bring Bethlem to the countryside, well at the time it was in the 1930s, and would encompass a more modern villa-style building system, with multiple separate wards, each having their own kitchen and other facilities. The new site would welcome a more modern approach to treatment, although the hospital would see electroconvulsive therapy and insulin shock therapy. In 1948, the hospital would be incorporated into the NHS and would follow the more talking therapy and medicinal approach, more familiar to today's mental health treatment. The hospital has still been a bit of a source of controversy in recent years, as there have been a couple of fatalities during restraint. Now, the current hospital covers quite a bit of ground, which is good for taking long afternoon walks, and incorporates a secure wing, as well as the natural psychosis unit. Now, if you're ever in this part of the world, I highly recommend going to the Museum of the Mind, which is built inside the hospital, as it is a fascinating place to visit and learn about the history of mental health treatment in the UK.